Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Green Pass Gaming. Please don't adjust your sets. This is normal service tonight. I am not Flat, but I am Scott, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. So, we're doing things a little bit differently tonight. Flap has had a hell of a week at work, I think it's fair to say. So I'm going to help steer the ship for everyone today. So it's a pretty good Sunday today for us over, well, I was going to say in the UK, but for us in England, still celebrating from last night's thumping victory over the Ukraine in the European Championships. And I know for those across the pond celebrating Independence Day, I'm sure it's a good day for everyone. Obviously, everyone else from around the world. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. So for tonight then, got hopefully a jam-packed show for everybody. We've got a couple of good topics and an even better panel. So for tonight's show, we're going to be talking about Xbox and Kojima. Jeff Grubb recently reported that a letter of intent has been signed, so we'll be delving into what that means, if the panel are excited, what on earth that game might actually be. PlayStation have been in the news a little bit this week as well, so they've acquired two new studios in Nix's and Housemarque. And then I guess a little bit unfortunate for them, they haven't been in the news for the best of reasons with some indie developers coming out. And they're not best pleased with Sony, it's probably fair to say. And then the third topic of the evening, we'll be chatting a little bit about Xbox game streaming. We've had some hardware upgrades this past couple of weeks, and we've seen if the panel have been delving into playing some game streaming since the upgrades. And then we've got a couple of other topics if we have enough time at the end of the show. But before that, let's jump into the panel. So not the usual co-host tonight. That normally it's Pucks. But tonight, my good friend Luke Steele is going to be helping me steer the ship. So how are you doing, Luke?
I am ill, but here nonetheless. I'm a lot better than I have been the last few days. The common cold has done quite a number on me, apparently, which is unfortunate. But I'm a lot better, and I'm happy to be here, particularly with the topics and obviously the change up in the panel and how we're going to do the show. And Pong being here, that's always really cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better, mate. Obviously, I hope you're feeling even better as soon as possible. But moving on, we have, I guess, the regular host of the show, Flap. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, mate. Yeah, it's kind of, I think this is probably the second time I've kind of been a panel member on kind of my own show almost, but I really enjoy it. You know what? It's been strange. I mean, I asked you guys if you could do us a favour because, like I say, work has been crazy this week, and you all stepped up to the mark. And ever since you said you'd do, I've been so excited to be a guest on my own show. I know it sounds crazy, doesn't it?
It's been a week.
But I'm really looking forward to it. Love the topics. Been a fairly sort of medium kind of game news week, I guess. But we always find a few scraps. Even if it's a quiet week, we find a few scraps and we go diving into those. But I'm really excited for tonight's topics, and excited to have the panel, the whole crew back, and obviously Pong Soul.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess speaking of the GPG crew, we are at a full house tonight. Last of the crew, but certainly by no means the least. We've got Pucks joining us as well. How are you doing, Pucks?
Evening, Scott, and evening, chat. Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you. Been pretty busy for me as well. As we just kind of said backstage, I'm kind of on a final wedding prep. I do my official marriage signing this coming Wednesday. And then celebrations will be the following Wednesday. So it's quite full on in the Pucks household at the moment, but it's all exciting at the same time.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure I speak for everyone, mate, that we hope Wednesday goes smoothly, and obviously the week after goes even better as well. Obviously, I'm in the process of doing a little bit of planning myself as well. We were picking out save the date cards today, so we're a little further behind you, mate. But
you'll have all of it to come soon.
Yeah. And last but certainly no means least, I mean, to be fair, I don't actually know if this man needs an introduction because I'm sure everybody knows of Pong Soul, but he is one half of the Live and Split Screen podcast. We had the other half, Steel Rain, on the show last week, but and he's actually a really, really big supporter of the show. So I'm sure everyone will be welcoming Mr. Pong Soul on the show. How are you doing, my friend?
What a fantastic time to come back. Independence Day. Obviously, you guys have huge victories over there with England, as you already talked about, Scott. It's your maiden cruise as captain of the Green Pass gaming ship. I mean, seriously, this is just an awesome day. You've got wedding plans. Puxley's got wedding plans. My God, there's just celebrations all over the place. Excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me back. Honored to be here with you guys. Just absolutely love and respect everything you do here. Love this community you guys have built and are building. So, man, anytime you guys invite me, I am going to be here. So thank you so much again. And we got some great topics. It might have been a slow news week, but we got some big topics to still talk about. So I'm excited to do that.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Pong. You're obviously always welcome, my friend. Like I say, you've been a big supporter of the show. You've been around as long as I can remember. Obviously, you've been on a few podcasts as well, so I'm sure people in the chat are
just a few.
with you.
Just a few.
just a few. Before we get into the topics then tonight, I guess first things first, I'm going to apologize for what is probably going to be the complete arse I make of this show over the next 2 hours. I do think Flap was a little brave letting me steer the ship. There's actually a lot of ship puns tonight, considering Sea of Thieves is the video in the background there as well. But before we get into it, we'll do just a little bit of a roll call in the chat. Who we got in there? We got Super Cosmic Puma, Meisuko, UK Dazarus, Stubbs, Ballman Gamer. Who else we got there? Achievement and Cerebral Paul. Thank you all very much. Oh, Fugly's in there as well. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. So I guess we can dive into the first topic tonight then, which is Xbox and Kojima. Now, for those who maybe haven't been keeping up with the news this week, our good friend and frequently, guys, he's often referred to, Mr. Jeffrey Grubb of VentureBeat, reported on his new show with Giant Bomb, actually, Grub Snacks. He was talking about how Kojima and Xbox have moved into, I guess, the next phase of discussions on the deal that's been rumored for some time now. Apparently, they've signed a letter of intent between both parties, which, according to Mr. Grubb, means that it's kind of at the stage now where we can be pretty confident that it's going to be moving ahead. Obviously, it's been pretty big news. Kojima is one of the biggest names in the industry, obviously coming off the back of a PlayStation exclusive with Death Stranding. And on top of that, it seems Microsoft are really gearing up for this project. In the past couple of weeks, they've hired Kim Swift, who previously worked on Portal, Left 4 Dead, and I think had previously worked at Stadia most recently as well, had joined specifically to work alongside Kojima on whatever this project may be. And obviously it is Kojima, so it could be bloody anything. So Luke, my friend, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first. I know you're feeling a little bit worse for wear today, but I know you do seem to be the biggest Kojima fan on the panel, I would say. So I guess putting it across to you first, man, how do you feel about this rumored project and Xbox working with Kojima?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody knows how much I love Kojima's games. I don't think I've ever played any of his games that I haven't enjoyed, actually. So, for me, it's great news. Mainly because more than anything, I'm just really happy that Kojima's next game is going to be significantly funded. And I think it's probably worth noting as well that it has moved on to the next stage, as it were, as Jeff Grubb has called it. To give some context about an LOI, a letter of intent. So it's not as though they can't fall apart, because they can, because an LOI is essentially just it's a prospective negotiated almost term sheet. It's just where two parties say, look, we're looking to work together in the future. Here are the very broad commercial terms of that, or what we expect to be the commercial terms.
Can I just ask, would there be clauses in that saying that they couldn't work with other people?
Not usually. It would be quite rare. The only binding element of an LOI typically, or the binding elements, are confidentiality. So those are the only things when you sign an LOI that say you can't do X, and for obvious reasons, right? Because you're negotiating a commercial deal. So nobody wants that to leak. Nobody wants that to be told to other people. So that's the only element of that is contractually binding, even though the LOI is not a contract. It's this weird thing. But anyway, so they can fall apart. I've seen them fall apart before. So it's not typical, but it can happen. And then the LOIs are then just passed to people like yours truly and other lawyers to say, here are the terms, go and draft some ridiculous contract that encapsulates all of those. And invariably then the whole deal changes because people have decided it needs to change. So it's a really good sign. It's a really good intent from both parties that it's going ahead. So I think that's really promising, and I'd be incredibly surprised if it didn't come to fruition now, because I think for Xbox, having Kojima's name attached to your platform in some capacity, and particularly in something exclusive, is really good, right? It's a really positive step. I don't see it like some people see it, where they think that this will help Xbox get a big foothold in Japan and stuff, because Kojima's games aren't really Japanese games; they're westernized games from a Japanese creator. But I just think it's great for the platform in general, and I'm really interested to see this kind of cloud, this rumored cloud functionality, what that actually means for the game. What will it entail? Obviously I don't think we're going to be sat here playing Kojima's game solely by the cloud. I think there will be a native game, but I suspect it will use something like Flight Sim does. Not the same thing, but it'll have some integration that's quite unique with the cloud in some way. So I'm just excited. I really am. It just, for me, it never matters who Kojima works with, but I always think that if he can work with like a specific partner that funds him and lets him kind of just run wild, as Sony did with Death Stranding, right, where they're just like, here's a bunch of money, go make what you want. It gets certainly gets him to make games that not everybody enjoys. But certainly games that are extremely unique in the AAA space, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, and you touched on the cloud aspect there, Luke, and I think that's kind of one of the unique elements of the game. Of obviously, I say game, it's obviously not a game yet, of whatever the game might turn out to be. And I guess from the cloud perspective, we've had maybe a couple of examples of games that have used the cloud on maybe both ends of the spectrum. We've had Crackdown 3, which maybe didn't quite pan out how it was expected, but then we had Microsoft Flight Simulator most recently. That has obviously been a massive hit for Microsoft. It's obviously coming to Xbox soon, and that seems to have I guess taken this cloud thing that we've been hearing about for years and actually making it into, I guess, something that we can actually, the game benefits from. So Flab, from your perspective, mate, when you think of like a cloud game, what does that make you? What does that make you think, especially when you consider maybe the type of games Kojima has made in the past?
Well, that's exactly the point, isn't it? Because if we were talking about anyone else, and you used to ask me that sort of question, you'd sort of think you'd kind of go down a conventional route. But because Kojima's involved, it's like it's just a blank piece of paper. I have no idea what he would do with that kind of that element to the game. And I was going to ask Luke a question actually, because I've not actually played Death Stranding. There was an element in Death Stranding where couldn't other people interact with your world and sort of build bridges and stuff? How did that work?
Yeah, no, that's right. So you had common areas in the world which you could deposit resources into, and they had kind of milestone elements where, as a certain amount of resources were deposited, a part of it would be built. And so one of the really cool things in that was that, as you say, which is mainly the bridge thing, and it went back to Kojima's constant talking about bridges when he was designing the game. There were bridges that could go across areas of the world that were very dangerous, but they weren't in existence until players actually came together across kind of the asynchronous multiplayer element, deposited resources and built it. But when it was built in one world, it would kind of carry across to other players' worlds as well. So you kind of collectively work together to build these elements of the game that would show up in your own world. So it was a really clever thing.
No, exactly. And so I can only imagine that, like you say, however clever that is and how cool that is just the stepping stone into his next game. I mean, to me, it feels like that was probably the test bed for whatever he had in his mind for the next project. And I don't think it will be an online world, although it could certainly be an online world, but it's I think other players would possibly be able to interact with your game or your world, and perhaps as a collective community, we shape the world that you play the game in. Does that make sense? I could see it being something as epic as that, and really hope it is. And you mentioned Crackdown 3. I think Crackdown 3 got quite a rough deal when it came to the whole cloud thing. I think Microsoft's, their idea was well ahead of their technology at the time. But I actually start to think that nowadays, with the Azure servers and things like that, we are actually starting to see their concept and their ideas become a reality in games. And I think, Flight Sim is probably a good example of that, where it can live stream into your local game stuff directly from the cloud. I think Crackdown 3 was mainly a maths thing, wasn't it? Because I think with the with the destructible buildings and the kind of, I won't call it particle effect, but the level of destruction, I think that it offloaded that sort of super calculation to the cloud. The cloud crunched some numbers and sent it back, and then your machine would obviously then just display and process that number locally, and obviously these buildings would collapse and stuff in real time and different every time, which is really cool. I mean, obviously the question remains is, well, what if you used to play it offline and stuff? But, I think back in the day, Microsoft and the team were very forward thinking. Like I say, Microsoft, they do this quite a lot. They'll produce some tech that's just not quite ready for the market yet, almost as a test bed. But what excites me the most is I think we with the Azure servers and stuff, we're nearly at a point where they can actually start making this a reality. And with Kojima on board, like I say, the sky is the limit, because who knows what he's planning and what he's got in his brain. I'm so excited to see what it could be that, I don't know if I'm just going to be able to wait long enough for it to come out. Because like you say, I think it's quite a long way off, to be honest, mate.
Yeah, it probably will be, won't it? I mean, realistically, if we're still at this sort of stage in the negotiations, it's at least, 4 or 5 years off. Although I did think that the Death Stranding project, I was astonished at how quickly that seemed to actually get released. I thought it was still years off, considering, when they first announced that project, he didn't have a team, he didn't have an engine. I know they ended up using the Decima engine. But I guess that's another aspect of this. They're going to have to go to a different engine. Would they use Unreal and maybe work with the Coalition, or might they use something like idTech? Now, could they leverage that? It'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Pong Soul, my friend, from your perspective, are you a Kojima fan? Are you a fan of his games?
Yes, I would say that I'm a fan. Would I say that I'm the biggest fan in the world? No. There has been some that just haven't hit with me. Death Stranding, I had my PlayStation back then, and it just was something that I wasn't willing to jump into at that point. Would I do it? Yeah, I'd probably jump into it just to try it, because, well, first of all, I try everything. So I always try to give everything a chance. But Kojima, to me, is definitely an eccentric genius when it comes to the video game industry. So for me, he's important no matter what, whether I like his games or I don't. I think that with Kojima and the way that he works, he pushes the medium as a whole in different directions. It may not necessarily always be forward to everybody's liking. However, from the point of view that we need people like him to try and take risks, much like an indie developer does. We see a lot of progress in the video game industry from the indies, right? You also need big names to try different things. And Kojima being one of the biggest names, whether you like him or whether you hate him, in the industry, it's important that we see things come from him that may not be tried elsewhere at first. And for me, it's vital that we have people like him in the industry. And so when it comes to this, thinking about it, he's probably thought of things, because he's been talking about the cloud gaming for years. And we're still in the infancy of what cloud can do, right? We're just seeing, a glimpse as to what the future is going to bring. We've heard Phil talk about, eventual cloud, developing entire games within the cloud. And that's obviously what they're looking towards in the future, because it opens up a whole lot more possibility, and it also breaks down barriers for accessibility when it comes to the development of these games. It's just going to allow more and more people to come into the industry and create their visions. But Kojima specifically has probably thought about and has ideas for the cloud that other people just haven't even considered yet. So when I look at this deal, this is huge for both parties. It gives Kojima the freedom to come in with the backing of an Xbox, a Microsoft behind him, to kind of realize what he's dreamed of when it comes to this game. Now, he was obviously working with Stadia at one point, and so for whatever reason, whether it was Phil Harrison killing the deal because they didn't want to commit to it because they knew they were going to be dropping out anyways, or whatever happened behind the scenes, that didn't work out. Now, he was working directly with Kim Swift, who we just found out was hired by Xbox. That was made public, which is a big part of this deal. Jeff Grubb also had mentioned that a couple weeks ago when they announced the Kim Swift hiring, that was a huge portion of bringing Kojima on board, because he was already comfortable with her, and they had been working together on whatever he was pitching to Stadia, because she was obviously a major part of Stadia's cloud services and where they were going, the games. So I think what we're going to see from Kojima is this horror game that he's been talking about for a long time. And he's going to use the cloud in ways to link, much like we saw in Death Stranding, what you guys were just talking about, as far as is having people interact with other people's worlds or different things within the game world, and having that access to other people's designs, or to their actions, maybe shaping the world, and you're going to see that affected when you're playing, right? So I think we're going to see this big vision where he's going to try to globally connect everybody to his game, whatever it may wind up being. But I do believe it's probably going to be a horror genre. It may be episodic. It just from a standpoint, it might be putting out like different chapters or different, however you want to think about it. Again, this guy is a movie maker in a game designer's body, right, at heart. So he's got these big giant visions. And I think that benefits Microsoft and Xbox, because you now have a name like Kojima that, again, no matter what you think of the guy, still draws people in. Just look at the talk that's been surrounding this ever since that blue box conspiracy that might be Kojima, right? It still draws people to this day. We had entire podcasts about whether or not this was actually Kojima. So you bring that notoriety into your ecosystem, and you're trying to push something like xCloud and cloud gaming, which is the future, right? That it is the future of Microsoft, and you give him this blank canvas to do what he's going to do on. You're going to have everybody talking about it, and we don't know if it's going to be a hit. We don't even know what it's going to be like. Everybody's been talking about. We still don't know. But let's just say it works out. Right. And Microsoft has, and I say Microsoft, again, it's Microsoft Xbox, but I say Microsoft because you can't discount the fact that they have the advantage of being able to take a risk on somebody like Kojima, give him all the backing and resources that he needs. And if it doesn't work out, oh, well, okay, no big deal. We still gained out of it because people were drawn to talk about what we going on over here, and that can't be calculated down the road. But let's say it does hit. Let's say it becomes a phenomenon. Let's say he uses the cloud to connect people on different devices, which is another thing that Xbox is pushing right now. Let's say this game you can interact with the game not just on your console, but through your phone or through your tablet, or whatever the case may be. So you're at work, and all of a sudden you get a text message from the game, right? And all of a sudden you've got a little thing that you can do to interact, which you will see the results when you get back on your console and get back into the game world. Well, let's say he connects the entire world and it becomes kind of a phenomenon, because we already know, especially in the East, India, Korea, China, Japan, mobile market is huge. You got all these people playing this game over there, and it becomes this worldwide phenomenon. Well, then that just proves the power of the cloud and what you've been talking about. So from a Microsoft standpoint, that's going to be a huge victory, but it's going to be a win no matter what at the end of the day, because people are going to hear about this. They're going to be curious about it. A lot of people are going to follow him and will join your ecosystem just to play his game, no matter if it's good or bad or otherwise. So that's that. Again, from both sides, from Kojima's standpoint and from Xbox's standpoint, it's a win-win partnership to get into this agreement. I'm excited for it. I can't wait to see what he does. I'm not the biggest horror fan. If it turns out to be a horror game, I'm still just going to try it because I'm going to want to see what it's all about. But, again, there's going to be a ton of people in that same boat. So this is a win-win for everybody involved, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, you're right, and you raised some interesting points actually there, Pong. And one I'd like to throw over to maybe Pucks, if you don't mind, is so Pong raised the point there about how it's good to have people like Kojima in the industry, someone that can take risks, someone that's kind of like a AAA indie developer almost in some respects. But one of the more fascinating aspects of this particular deal from my perspective is Kojima's come off the Death Stranding, as we've spoken about, which is his first game sort of away from Konami under Kojima Productions. Obviously, it's difficult to maybe measure success with Death Stranding. I think critically it was a success. Commercially, maybe less so. But if Kojima's games or if this project is as exciting as it potentially could be, why might Sony not have been interested? Do you think this is something that maybe was pitched to Sony originally and they rejected, or is it simply be Microsoft picking up the pieces of whatever was left of the Stadia deal?
Yeah, my kind of first instinct is really that I do wonder, and I have thought about this before, about whether or not since the Kojima Konami kind of breakup, Konami and PlayStation, at least from my perspective, seem to have a pretty good working relationship and have done for quite a few years now. So I kind of think that did the whole Konami Kojima split potentially kind of muddy the waters between Kojima and Sony? Because I suppose at the end of the day, we don't really know what went on behind closed doors, right? So
yeah,
there could have been all sorts of things said and done that maybe PlayStation weren't interested anymore. Maybe they didn't want to take those risks. I mean, they very much said that they are after those big single player cinematic experiences, and I agree with what you just said there, that how critically I think Death Stranding appeared to have done very well. People that played it really liked it. It was relatively divisive in some circles as well, but I do agree that I don't think personally I see it as a big commercial success, to be blunt about it. I mean, I don't know any figures, but again, it's one of those games which kind of it had its moment for about 2 or 3 days, and it kind of disappeared by the wayside and didn't really hear much of it again. And the only times it really came up was when you heard Kojima's name in some other future news. So it is definitely a risky game. He definitely likes to take risks. So I'm kind of wondering, I mean, given the position that Xbox are in now, I mean, they've paying billions with this big the Bethesda acquisition and everything else. So you could argue that Microsoft are now in a position where they are taking that financial risk because, well, I suppose partially you could argue that Microsoft are probably in safe hands by having someone like Bethesda under their wing. But at the same time, it's still a risk, right? Because if the games that they then release in the future don't make enough money, then you could argue that was the money worth it? Will it redeem its costs? So a game has to be successful. So I think something like Death Stranding, in my eyes, is definitely that out there Kojima game. It's definitely at least from my perspective, it definitely appears to be quite an experiment. I know a number of people call it a glorified walking sim. I know Luke will probably hate me for that, but I say I haven't played it, so I can't critique it really. But some of the things I have heard, which I do find interesting, especially regarding his kind of horror game history and wanting to take advantage of the cloud, is I read an interview very recently that Kojima said that one of the things that he doesn't like about people trying to get into horror games is that they get to, the whole point of a horror game is that they are very suspenseful. They're meant to have those jump scares. They're meant to be quite creepy, but you want to kind of keep going. But there obviously is a large proportion of people who don't, or the suspense gets too much to the point that a lot of people stop playing, so they don't actually fully enjoy those games because they never actually get far enough into it. And part of this interview, I remember Kojima saying that he wanted to try and create he didn't necessarily specify how, but he wanted to think about and create a new way of how to get people into the horror games, how to overcome the suspense and to actually complete these experiences and open these up to people. So I'm wondering, as similar to kind of what Pong was saying there on the offbeat of that, about how by utilizing cloud computing and having these kind of multiple real players that affect the game world in some way, it's kind of made me think, is maybe one of the things on Kojima's mind, trying to create a horror experience, but then the idea of getting people that aren't so sure about horror games to play them is to have virtually or invisibly other players interacting with your same world to help you as you play, almost like an external comfort, if that makes sense. Which it's a bit of another idea, I guess, but this is Kojima we're talking about, right? He takes those kind of risks. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of, really. But in terms of, is it a good deal for Microsoft? I think, well, I don't think they would do it otherwise, but I think one of the things that a lot of people do tend to say, in the general populace, is about how a lot of the Microsoft IP can tend to be quite samey, or, it's all just repeated stuff. I know you could argue that there's definitely a lot of new IP coming out, a lot of rebooted IP, such as Fable and a lot of others which are coming out, things that are Avowed as well. But again, these aren't out yet, and we all know, I think, at least from what we see and read online, is that Microsoft are definitely now in a position where they want to push Xbox as much as they can, and part of that plan is to try and generate new IP or recreate existing IP in some form. So I think if you're going to take a risk, you want to have someone who's at least done it with some success, and Kojima definitely seems to be one of the best people you could possibly pick for that, I think.
Yeah, he actually is a good point. I think there's just one thing that will come of this game is it'll be unlike anything any of Xbox's existing first-party studios will create. They're not going to create anything like a Death Stranding or whatever this game might end up turning out to be. But on the subject of the type of game it is, Luke, maybe just going back to you again as our sort of resident Hideo Kojima fan, and I think Stubbs has maybe mentioned it in the chat as well, around the actual genre of the game. There's been rumors of it being episodic. I think Stubbs has mentioned that maybe he's actually looking to create something that's a little bit more uplifting rather than maybe a horror-focused game or something like Death Stranding. Do you have sort of any expectations about, if we take Kojima and what he does and put it into this sort of maybe an episodic, uplifting type game, what that might actually turn out to be?
I've got no idea. Literally no idea. It's hard to predict Kojima's games anyway coming out on Metal Gear Solid, because he is someone with very different and quite big ideas compared to pretty much all of the game developers, actually. And Death Stranding shows that, right? I don't think anybody could have actually predicted where he was going with that game, because it is so different. I do agree with Stubbs completely on the point that, and he said this in an interview, I think it was a Summer Game Fest show.
It was the one with Jeff Keighley, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I found truly bizarre.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird interview, because I guess he wanted to talk a bit about what he was doing or what he wanted to do in the future, and then also show off the director's Death Stranding director's cut as well. But he said in that, that he was kind of the games he's made in the past, they've all been about, kind of problems and difficulties that humans face, and he tried to kind of predict those in some way. Stuff like Metal Gear Solid is about kind of the cycle of war and the difficulties that kind of commercialization of militarization have, and all this sort of stuff. And Death Stranding's about like this kind of almost post-apocalyptic world where all we have is each other, sort of thing, and blah blah blah. And then he said, that he was looking, kind of changing his vision as to what he wants to create next, and he seemed to indicate that whatever he creates next will be kind of trying to convey more of a positive message. And I think that came out of COVID, really, that he was surprised that something like this had actually happened, even though he never predicted COVID. But you see the point. Yeah. So I don't think he will create anything like a horror game or anything like that. I think whatever he creates, and I know everybody wants him to create a horror game, but really, the Silent Hills dream is dead, at least with Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, and everyone else. Right, that's gone. Sadly, it's gone. And I don't think Kojima is particularly attracted to horror games because he said before that he's a wuss. Basically, he likes horror stuff, but he can't go through it, right? He's actually scared of this stuff, which kind of makes him a good candidate to make a horror game. But I think he's more attracted now to these different kinds of ideas than what a horror game would provide. So, yeah. So I don't know, in all honesty. It will be weird and wonderful because that's what Kojima does. But I think it will be, more. I don't even want to say lighthearted because I don't know if he'll do something lighthearted per se. But I just think it will be almost a bit like Death Stranding, right? Because Death Stranding's not, I mean, it's not a depressing game as such. It's kind of, it has a central message. It kind of clumsily gets there, but I think it will be more uplifting than that, certainly. But I don't know. It's a really hard one. He's probably the only developer where you just I can't predict what he's going to make. I just don't know. In terms of mechanics, in terms of tone, anything like that, I've got no idea. So that's why it's exciting, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, he is sort of one of a kind in some respects, and I say that even as someone who's not actually a big fan of Kojima's games. Admittedly, I haven't played Death Stranding, so I can't comment on that one too much. What I saw of it didn't necessarily appeal to us, but he is one of maybe just a very handful of, I guess, almost celebrity game developers in some respects, whose name by itself kind of commands sort of respect, or I was going to say gives you an idea of what to expect, but for him it's kind of the opposite. His name kind of gives you an idea of it could be bloody anything. But you mentioned there it's exciting maybe to see what it is, and Flat, maybe one final point on this before we see what's happening in the chat. Kind of one of the things that I'm thinking is, because of how sort of early in the process this is, it's likely we're not going to see this game for sort of 3, 4, 5 years, maybe potentially even longer, depending on how much he needs to deliver on it. And we're in a position now where Microsoft are really ramping up first party. They've got 2022, 2023 and beyond are probably going to be massive for Microsoft from a first party perspective. And I guess one aspect that I've kind of looked at what Microsoft have been doing recently is kind of bolstering things like Game Pass in the shorter term by signing deals like they did with Outriders. So this seems a little unusual where they're signing this third party deal with I imagine Kojima will hold whatever IP it is. And yet it's going to be so far off, but maybe at a time when they don't need it. Does it come as a surprise that they'll sign this type of deal so far away when we know what's kind of in the future for Microsoft's first party?
Kind of yes and no, really. As we've alluded to, Kojima is very unique in what he does. And I think, it's a little bit like signing up Ronaldo, isn't it? There's not many Ronaldos in the world. So when Ronaldo's up for sale and you're in the bidding war, it's an exciting time. That's a really good analogy, actually, Flat. Well, you need a striker or not. If Ronaldo's gone, you got to sign him, kind of thing. Exactly, and that's exactly how it seems. And it was quite interesting you said about sort of Sony and stuff. Makes me wonder if Kojima is very solid on the particular game that he wants to deliver, and whether Microsoft are literally the only people that are around that can actually deliver that. I think he's also kind of got a blank checkbook almost, and as much time as he needs. I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of pressure for him to absolutely. I mean, I know he can be a bit slow at releasing games and stuff, but I think Microsoft will, they will capitalize on this, particularly, say, in the Japanese markets. And I think, Kojima and PlayStation in the past kind of historically align. So to have him exclusively on the platform kind of might start enticing a few PlayStation people over, or perhaps make, something like Game Pass even more enticing. Even though that's difficult to do, I think they would actually make Game Pass more enticing. And like you say, if there's a Ronaldo going, you're going to go for it. So I'm not massively surprised, to be honest. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it aligns with their first party studios and their roadmap for the future. I think, like you say, it's obviously very early doors just yet. But I think it's going to be a very exciting time for Microsoft when they can actually get him signing up and get him working on the game, and they're past the sort of point of no return almost with regards getting the game made. And like I say, just planning it into their roadmap, because like I say, I can guarantee they're going to capitalize on the fact they've got someone like Kojima, making hopefully an exclusive game just for them that is possibly the most unique thing that we've seen in a very, very long time. I'd also just add that, Kojima mentioned, this sort of post 9/11 era. He mentioned that a few times in an interview, and I thought that was a bit odd. 9/11 was 20 years ago, and as obviously as massively horrific as it was 20 years ago. So. Yeah, and I think Luke's right. I think it's more to do with the COVID and the world situation along those sort of lines. But it's going to be strange to see him create an uplifting game, because, his games have a depth and a breadth to them that I'm not sure how that would align to an uplifting game, if that makes sense. Because surely, something like The Last of Us or some real deep games, that their whole depth comes from the human agonizing and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit odd, but like Luke says, it's a blank piece of paper. Who knows what he's got in store? Just really exciting, and I just hope Microsoft pull it off, and we get to know in a few years what this is all about.
Yeah, I think that is the only shame, isn't it? That it is probably a couple of years off before we'll find out. But I imagine if, let's say, it's E3 in 2023 or whatever it is that it's announced, it'll probably be one of the biggest news pieces that come from that conference, just because it's Kojima working on an exclusive. It will be the same if it was with PlayStation, the same with Death Stranding was, I guess. So I'm conscious that our first topic's gone on. We're almost at 45 minutes now, so I thought maybe we'll hand over to the chat. So I don't know if we've got any comments on this from the guys in the chat.
Yeah, we've got a few, so I'll just pick a select few out, actually, so as not to keep Kojima's name up for the rest of the show. So Stubbs said that it being Kojima's next game will be nothing like Death Stranding. It will be a positive, uplifting game, which I think is a point we touched on, right? That's what Kojima said, and I think that's probably true. Shiz Noeli was talking about, mentioned when we were talking about the kind of cloud tech, we mentioned Crackdown 3, saying that the tech for Crackdown 3 is impressive. Unfortunately, that multiplayer got thrown together last minute after Epic bought CloudGen out from under Microsoft, which is true. I think we all agree the early Crackdown 3 tech demos were really impressive, actually, and then they had to kind of go back to the drawing board, and we got something that was not even quite as good, nowhere near as good as those. Yeah. Super Cosmic Puma Cloud said that hosted procedural world would be mad, considering the ability to spin up VMs and have elastic scaling. That's in reference to maybe Kojima's game having something like that, which I think, would be a really interesting idea. And certainly, if you look at the kind of stuff that Death Stranding does in terms of, those kind of bridge instances and stuff like that, I think that would be a natural build. Let's have a look. What else? So Achievement Kojima, it says Kojima along with it at Xbox are the vital resources that Xbox needs to really drive up series in Japan. Show Xbox has the biggest and smallest of the Japanese audience. I think that's kind of like, I think people agree, like some people agree with that and some people disagree. I don't know how you feel, Scott, about that, whether like Kojima would influence the Japanese market in any way. Personally, I'm on the side that it wouldn't, that it wouldn't drive up any kind of Japanese sales of consoles or anything like that. But I don't know.
I think that's fair, mate. Because as you say, his games seem to be more tailored towards a Western audience. It's not like he's out there creating JRPGs or anything. But who knows what his next game might be?
Isn't it more? Isn't it more along the lines that Japanese devs might follow the path?
Exactly. And I think Stubbs just mentioned that in the chat there, where maybe Kojima, being obviously as famous as he is as a Japanese developer, maybe that gives confidence to other Japanese developers to work with Microsoft. They see Kojima do it, and if it's a success, maybe they want a piece of that action.
I guess so. But really, Kojima's made many games for Microsoft and Xbox, multi-platform. But he's done a lot of that. But it hasn't really, it's not moved the needle on a lot of the kind of Japanese games that we think of that should come to Xbox. If you're thinking of stuff, I guess, like Persona, right? Those kind of really traditional Japanese games, and then broader than that. I don't think an exclusive deal with Microsoft moves the needle for Japanese developers, because, or the only way it does is that it says, okay, well, someone's, Microsoft are willing to give this guy a massive budget, so maybe they'll give us a massive budget. But again, Microsoft aren't going to do that for everybody because nobody else is Kojima. So
that's fair.
So I don't know, but it's a really interesting point, and it's a point that always kind of comes up, and it'll be interesting to see the effect. And then I guess the last one, Kojima related, Chizno Elite said that he was surprised Kojima got Death Stranding out as fast as he did, and it gives him hope that we'll see his new game this gen, which is very true. I don't think anyone expected Kojima to make Death Stranding as quickly as he did. It was essentially 3 and a bit years. Yeah. I think part of that was driven by the fact that he got a ready-made engine to do it, which certainly helped a lot, and he's got quite a big team. But it depends on how ambitious the game is, right? Because this one may be more ambitious than Death Stranding, and certainly to some extent it is, given that it's cloud-based. So, but I think
a quick question. Why do you think PlayStation ported Death Stranding to PC before something like Uncharted or God of War? Why do you think they did that? Is it to generate more cash for the game, or? Yeah,
I think because I think Death Stranding, I think commercially it did fine. I don't think it was a failure. I think it was just it did fine. Sort of around the lower expectations probably of what Sony expected. So I would imagine that it just came from the fact that Sony thought, well, we can make a bit more extra money out of this game because we can pop it on PC, and also actually thinking about it, going way back, it was announced to be on PC right at the time the game was announced, so it was already in motion that it was going to be on PC. It's just that for a weird period, no PC element was mentioned, which a lot of people took as, oh, maybe they've just scrapped the PC version. But they never did. They just focused on the PlayStation version. But I think certainly, even notwithstanding that, it's good for Sony just to get extra money out of it, because it was always coming to PC anyway.
Yeah. Remind me, which one came first on PC, Death Stranding or Horizon Zero Dawn?
That is a good question.
So the reason I ask is because obviously they were both on the Decima engine. So I do wonder if maybe there was an element of, let's try this engine out on PC, and maybe whichever one came first was maybe a test bed for the other almost.
I thought Death Stranding came first, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, you might. I think you're right, Flap. That's how I remember it. I just can't be.
Yeah, I think it was Death Stranding first, but yeah, that it was a weird situation where that was announced originally to be coming to PC, and it eventually did come to PC. It was just for a time, nobody thought it was actually happening, and then it did. So that's about it for the Kojima topic.
Fantastic. Well, I guess before we move on to the next topic, we'll just have a quick look at chat. I think we've got a few other people in there. I can see Dragon Wolf, it's Timmy, Arturo Trevino, Indie Gamers in there as well, Judzilla Music, as well as everyone else. So again, thank you very much for being here. For those who weren't here at the beginning, again, don't adjust your sets. This is still Green Pass Gaming. I've just taken the reins for sort of one night only, I guess. But we'll move on to the next topic. So I guess this is going to be our sort of our PlayStation section of the show, and they've had a bit of a week, it seems, both on the positive and maybe the not so positive side of things. So maybe we'll start with the positive side of things to begin with. So PlayStation did announce that they acquired two, and maybe let's slip that there was a third acquisition just in 1 week. Firstly, acquiring the developers of Returnal, Housemarque. Obviously, they've had quite a long and established relationship for some time now, so maybe not too much of a surprise, but they did announce that Housemarque was joining PlayStation Studios. Along with that, PlayStation Japan on their blog may have let slip that maybe Bluepoint was next on the list. They posted a picture where it quite obviously had Bluepoint's name and logo. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, how do you get that wrong unless you just posted the wrong image? So maybe they let slip that there's another one another one on the way. And then a little bit later in the week, they announced the acquisition of Nix's. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Apologies if that's incorrect. I wasn't actually aware of who Nix's were until Luke very kindly sort of educated me on what those guys do. It seems that they're maybe primarily working on maybe PC ports of games, which maybe has an indication of where PlayStation are going with their first party studios. And then I guess the interesting thing is, alongside the Housemarque acquisition, I think there was an interview with Herman Hulst, who was talking about the acquisition and what Sony are doing with their first party. And I guess, Pucks, if you don't mind, we'll come to you first, mate, if that's all right. They spoke about being in an arms race. Or specifically not being in an arms race, but announcing 2, maybe 3 new acquisitions in the space of a week was certainly maybe a statement of intent. Although maybe one of them wasn't too much of a surprise. In terms of these acquisitions, do you feel that they're doing this maybe because they maybe feel it have to respond to Microsoft's spending spree recently, or do you think this is just a natural sort of evolution of PlayStation's first party studios?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that second one. I think this is more just a natural evolution because it was it mid last year when Sony announced the PlayStation Studios initiative kind of thing, similar to Xbox Game Studios, right? But I think at the time there wasn't really too many names, like especially bigger names. They didn't really have too many under their belt, as what I can remember. So I see this as just like a general evolution. But then at the same time, I think there's a lot of people in the public who are aware and cautious that they don't want these big conglomerates to potentially start eating up all of the other third parties and the indie devs, like almost buying out competition, so to speak, to build up their own kind of empires. But I definitely see this as a good move. I mean, Housemarque is, a very skilled and talented group, but I think you could argue they are kind of an indie dev, right, I guess, in the higher end extreme. But I don't necessarily have too much in terms of games under their belt, as what I can tell, from what I remember, sorry. But again, there was massive success from Returnal, from what I've seen. A load of people love that game. I think PlayStation especially seems to really love the quality and the commitment of the developers toward the game as well, and how well it's done. And I can only believe that PlayStation are, again, maybe taking a risk by buying out someone who are, or acquiring, I should say, but acquiring the company who may not necessarily have much of a track record to kind of prove themselves against. But again, if Returnal's anything to go by, and now they have the full backing of PlayStation to help support future titles, clearly to me that kind of outlines that they have enough confidence in the company that maybe there'll be brand new IP that Housemarque will start to deliver. And something like Returnal was, you could argue, I mean, they're kind of similar games to it, but again, maybe Luke can correct me here, but I don't think there's many games that are quite like it in terms of how the mechanics and the gameplay kind of all tie together. So I suppose in a way you could argue that maybe this is one of PlayStation's kind of plans to maybe respond to taking on a smaller company who could potentially bear, I don't want to say bear the risks, but basically they could take the risks of maybe creating something a bit different to maybe, and if the public catch on to something, then maybe they'll take it and buy it and it becomes a brand new fulfilling IP for years to come. But on the other side, is it Nixis, or however you pronounce it? I'm in the same boat as you, Scott, sorry. I think this is a very interesting one because I think they are mainly a porting business, aren't they? They don't actually create their own games as far as I'm aware. So I find this very interesting, and it definitely seems to support the previous claims that PlayStation had about wanting to bring their current IP to the PC platform in some description. And, rather than potentially trying to outsource this and maybe not have complete control over the process, or just doing it over emails and calls once a week, or however the business works, to have the business under your banner entirely, I suppose bringing everything under one house makes things a lot easier to have under that kind of, one virtual roof, and they can all kind of work together to bring all these new new titles to PC. So it seems quite encouraging, I suppose is the word for me, that actually we hopefully in the future we'll start seeing more of Sony's kind of bigger IPs also coming to PC as well, because it does seem that Sony are aware that there are a lot of people out there that do love the Sony IP but may not necessarily be able to afford to pay for a console as well as having a PC they maybe work with. So similar to Microsoft, I mean, they had the advantage by all being under Microsoft, right? So they kind of, by integrating Xbox into that Microsoft ecosystem, they kind of had it easy, arguably. But for PlayStation to now have I suppose, an arguably easier way to do that through being able to port their titles through a proven company to do so, I think it's definitely good things to come, I'd like to believe. And fingers crossed they do start bringing some of their bigger IPs. I mean, if we start seeing on games like Uncharted 4, I know that was rumoured a while back to potentially being ported to PC. We've not heard anything about it yet for quite a while, but if and when the moment that is announced and that drops, I think a load of people are going to be super excited, and hopefully that means that they will bring their future games to PC in the future.
Yeah, you touch on a couple of really good points that I'd like to get to there, Puck. So one of them was obviously Nix's, and whether that means maybe more first-party games on PC, maybe even day and date, which I think is a little less likely. The first one, though, that I'd like to touch on, I'll ask Pong for his opinion on this, if that's okay, Pong. So you talked about how they've obviously released Returnal. They seem to be happy with the results. And I think this is kind of one of the things that has been interesting in, I guess, the gaming sphere, so to speak, which is around this whether people are cool essentially with these big giant corporations acquiring smaller development studios. And I look at somebody like Housemarque, who have openly spoken in the past about the struggles that maybe they've had in releasing games. And I think one of the things that they've said is they want to try different things, but ultimately they haven't had the financial success that they would have liked, which just means they've kind of had to revert to maybe types of games that they know sell that are successful financially. And when I look at acquisitions like this, I think that actually having the back end of PlayStation, or whether it be Nintendo buying Next Level or Microsoft buying someone like Ninja Theory, really gives these developers the opportunity just to create what they want, not having to worry about the bank balance, not having to worry about releasing a game because they need cash flow. I think Double Fine have spoken about that in the past as well, they've got to bring money in to pay the developers, and that obviously has an impact on what type of games they can make when they've got to release them. So Pong, from your perspective, when you look at these types of acquisitions, what side of the fence do you sit on? Do you think these are good for the industry? Do you think these are bad? Do we need more independent developers? Do we need Microsoft and Sony buying more developers so they can, I guess, achieve ultimately what they want to do with their games?
Yeah, I look at this as a natural progression. I think the people that are sounding the alarms are a little misguided when it comes to this. This industry has never been bigger. I think there's something, and again, I always hate throwing out numbers, but I think I've read or I've heard from somebody that there's like 4,000 developers out there in the world right now. Some ridiculous number. This is a natural progression of how things work. Yes, we are seeing an increase in consolidation right now, and have been over the past couple of years. It is a seller's market right now. So if you have a development house and you've produced good work, and you've got the attention of some of the bigger players in the industry, this is the time to do it, because prices are through the roof. We just saw EA purchase one of the Warner Brothers mobile studios for over $1 billion. I think it was $1.5 billion. So the prices right now are a seller's market. I think there are always going to be independent developers, and there's always going to be independent developers that want to remain independent. What we've seen so far is not hostile takeovers. These are developers that have more than wanted to be acquired by a bigger studio for a lot of the reasons that you obviously just mentioned, Scott. Again, there's a risk to any small business, but in the video games industry, that risk is even higher than most. And we heard Phil specifically talk about this when IGN, on the last IGN interview that they just did with him, when they were asked him about the acquisitions. And I think he was spot on that this is just a natural progression in the industry, that when you start a company and you are small and you're pouring in not just your own finances in a lot of a lot of cases, but you're pouring in all of your time, your blood, your sweat, your tears, almost literally at this point, to make sure that you have the best chance to succeed. You eventually, probably in the back of your head, if not one of your main goals listed out, is to be successful enough to be noticed by these bigger entities, to get that safety net by joining them, because it is a safety net. You can finally let out a sigh of relief, because normally, yeah, there are some single independent developers out there, but for the most part, you're talking about teams, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 40 people as an independent developer, you're talking about having to support other people. And those people have families. Those people have real lives as well outside of their job as a developer. And you're responsible for that. That's the same with any small business owner. So to have that safety net, to be able to bring in your team underneath an umbrella like Xbox or like Sony or like Nintendo and say, hey, everybody take a deep breath. Paychecks are covered as long as we keep doing what we're doing and we keep pumping out great stuff. We have zero worries, right? And we can finally, guess what? Look at some of those crazy ideas that we might have had on the back burner because we knew that they might be too big of a risk for us as an independent. We can now bring those forward and explore those and maybe make something out of it, right? And that's the success stories that you're starting to see, or that you have seen throughout the history of the industry, but especially now. I mean, look at Rare. Would Sea of Thieves be here right now if it wasn't for Microsoft? Chances are no. It was too big of a risk. Or had they done it and it had that, initial, when they had all the issues and when it looked like it was not going to take off, they might have just closed it down and said, you know what, we can't afford to work on this anymore. We have to, go ahead and shut it down and just call it a loss at the end of the day. And might have cost some people some jobs. Yeah, it might have. Instead, being underneath Xbox, being underneath Microsoft, they got to continue to develop that. And now it's one of Xbox's biggest success stories, right? And so that's what we're seeing in the industry. And I think that, again, the people that are sounding the alarms aren't looking at the total picture. There is, again, this industry is growing at record pace right now. We are seeing more and more people dive into this. We're seeing Hollywood talent come in that normally would have gone to TV and movies, now entering the video game space. We are seeing all of this growth. And so anytime you see somebody acquired as an independent developer or a smaller team, or even if it's a bigger team that gets acquired, like a ZeniMax, you're going to see people backfill that whatever hole was left. We just saw, Casey Hudson just started his new studio, Humanoid. So you're going to see that talent just backfill and grow, again, in that place that was suddenly open. So I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a good thing. I think it shows the health of the industry right now, because we're not seeing the studios closing down as much anymore. We're seeing them acquired and allowed to grow. If you just look at, everything that's happened when Xbox especially has made all these acquisitions, all those studios are still hiring to this day. Obsidian is still hiring. In Exile is still hiring. So they are taking care of more people as well. This is a good thing. The Housemarque specific acquisition needed to be done. This should have been done a long time ago. They finally put the ring on the finger. They've been dating together for a long time. They got a bunch of kids running around out there. It's time that Sony, married them and did this, because it just makes sense. And, some of the smoke that was thrown out there, some of the articles, or people tried to, say it was smoke, with Sony come out and saying, well, you can't just throw money around. That's not how it works. You know what? When you read Herman Hulst's quotes and you read Phil's quotes, they are exactly alike in what they look for. Xbox is not out here just willy-nilly throwing around $7.5 billion to acquire a studio that they just looked at and said, boy, you look pretty here, I'm going to buy you. That's not how this is working. Microsoft and Xbox look for specific partners that they know will fit within their family. They've generally worked with these people multiple times. They understand the leadership. They have actual, relationships with the people personally within these dev teams that they are acquiring. That's important to them, because they don't want to have a extended amount of time where there's a lot of, where you learn to adapt to each other. They want it to be as seamless as possible. They want to bring them in, let them continue to work as they have been. And Sony's no different. So when you see a Housemarque acquisition, and when you see potentially a Blue Point acquisition, which again makes sense, those two have been dating for a long time, done a lot of work together, it just makes sense that they're going to bring them in eventually. Again, that fits the pattern. It fits the mold of what they're looking for when they look to get these people. So I think this is a great thing. The stability to dev teams is, I don't think it's calculable. That's why I think you hear everybody talk about it. Especially we've heard a lot from a lot of the teams that were acquired by Xbox through the years of how great it is to finally take a deep breath, to finally be able to sit back, not worry about the end numbers. Yes, at the end of the day, you still want to be successful. Yes, at the end of the day, you still want to put out a great game. And yes, eventually that is still important to Microsoft and Xbox's goals. But you don't have to worry as much that, hey, if we put out one game that doesn't hit, that might mean our entire studio is gone. That might mean all these people that are dependent upon this are going to be unemployed, right? That worry is gone. And they can focus on creating the games that they want to, and that usually will lead to something good at the end of the day. So again, bravo to Sony for finally doing this. I love Housemarque. They're an ascending studio. There's somebody who gets better with every game, and I can't wait to see what they've got next. They proved with Returnal that they are up to the task to make a AAA style game, and obviously we already know the quality that comes out of Sony. Again, this confidence that Housemarque now has, I think is going to show in their future games, and I think they're going to fit right in with what Sony's got going on. And Blue Point, get it done, Sony. Again, Blue Point with them, they are so good at remaking games. Sony has an entire backlog of valuable IP just sitting there that is begging to be remade and brought up to speed. They could sell and sell. Just think of the Jack and Daxters, think of the Twisted Metals, think of the Sly Coopers out there. You could go back and just simply remake those games, polish them up, make them look pretty, and people will buy them nonstop. People are just waiting for that nostalgia kick. So that makes sense. And the Nixus studio obviously makes sense with their with moving forward and their goals and what they set forth as kind of their new I guess business model as they try to figure out what they're going to do going forward with Microsoft and Xbox now kind of setting the pace with Game Pass and with porting their stuff over to PC for the past years. Microsoft already has that whole process in place because they've been working on it. So Sony's got to catch up. So getting somebody like Nixus to help them continuously push those IPs to PC, port them over, give them the best chance to succeed on PC. I think that fits right in with what they've got going on and kind of shows us that they're serious about this roadmap and they know that they have to start getting their content in other places because it just means more money. And more money, as much as the diehards want to say, oh, you devalue your console by putting it elsewhere, that's a lie. That's completely false. You are just giving these teams more opportunity to make more money, which in turn means you get more content at the end of the day. So again, bravo, shout out to Sony. They're doing what they need to do. I definitely don't think it was reactionary. I think it's just a natural progression movement here. We're seeing the consolidation. You got to get the dev teams that you want to get right now before somebody else swoops in. And it's not just Microsoft, it's Tencent, it's the Amazons if they ever get serious about Luna. Google's still hanging around out there. I know they're not as big as anymore, but there's plenty. There's an Embracer group that has 50 some dev teams right now. So there's a lot of players out there that are looking to make these kind of acquisitions. So you got to get your teams now while the getting's good, so you can have your choice of who you want to bring into your family. Bravo. Good job.
Yeah, you raised some really, really good points there, Pong, and it's kind of where I'm thinking. When I look at these sorts of things and how generally I think these are positive. You mentioned these aren't hostile. I guess the most famous example of that might be was it Vivendi? I believe he maybe tried to acquire
trying to overtake Ubi. Yeah.
Obviously, that's slightly different. And one of the best examples that I've got is maybe someone like Ninja Theory. They, if I remember correctly, around 90% of their developers during the development of the original Hellblade, I believe around 90% of their developers, or somewhere to that effect, were actually outsourced. and assisting other studios essentially just to bring money in to pay the bills. And then a smaller team of however many people were essentially working on Hellblade in the background. But that's how they got that cash flow into to allow them to create a game. But that meant 90% of their workforce or whatever it was were focused on another developer's game rather than their own. And now under Microsoft, they're going to develop Hellblade 2 with essentially a budget that probably seemed unthinkable to them previously without the pressure of that. So I guess same question to you, mate, if you don't mind, is in terms of these acquisitions, how do you feel about them? Do you think these are good for the industry, bad, and where do you see this going? Do you expect this is just the first of many for Sony? Do we expect Microsoft to continue to invest in first party? Do you think we're going to continue to see Sony bringing more studios into the PlayStation Studios family?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the console wars, in inverted commas, or console competition, shall we call it, I think this generation is going to be the hottest competition we've seen between Microsoft and Xbox, between PlayStation and Xbox, and they absolutely want to make sure they got the best lineup of games and get as many people on their platform as possible. And let's face it, PlayStation aren't stupid. They've seen what Microsoft are doing. They know the infrastructure they've got and the capital backing them up. PlayStation do want to respond. Whether this was going to happen anyway, it probably was, because like Pong said, this kind of seems obvious, doesn't it? But at the same time, I personally think it's kind of a good thing, really. Does that mean, it means we're never going to see a Housemarque game on Xbox or a Bluepoint game on Xbox? But were we anyway? Who's going to miss out on that? And to be honest, if they bring those games to PC, and like you say, the acquisition of Nixis as well, we might be seeing more sort of PlayStation only titles coming to PC anyway. No, I think it's a good thing, and I think Pong raised a very good point as well. The games industry's never been as big as it is right now, and it's getting bigger. And COVID obviously helped that to a certain degree. The sales of the new consoles are through the roof on all platforms, and we're a voracious bunch. We're always after content, and games get bigger and harder to make. And I think that when studios are bought up, it does leave a vacuum behind for some of the smaller indie devs to sort of move into that space. Because, if you predominantly play AAA games, they're not that frequent. So, we'll play a AAA game, and what fills the void between AAA games is probably some pretty top flight indie games. Unless you're an indie game, and it's probably the other way around. You're constantly playing indie games with the odd AAA thrown in. But no, I think it's a good thing, to be honest. It seems obvious that that this move by PlayStation is the right one, to be honest. And who knows what PlayStation's future roadmap looks like? But perhaps they have got something lined up where they want more first-party studios on board. So something like Game Pass, something to perhaps compete with Game Pass. If they can bolster their first-party lineup and make whatever that platform may look like more appealing, then now's the time to buy. I think it's a good thing, to be honest.
Yeah, and I see. I mean, like I say, I'm in agreement that that's sort of my sentiment. But you do still see people who are generally against any sort of acquisitions because they see these sort of giant corporations. Obviously, Xbox is $1 trillion, or Microsoft, sorry, are $1 trillion company. Obviously, Sony are billions of dollars in size as well, and they see them sort of gobbling up these small developers, and they see that as a negative. But as Pong so mentioned, and you touched on as well, gaming, these companies are probably at their most valuable right now. They're probably the most valuable that they will ever be. So if you're going to sell, maybe now is the time to do it. And again, touched on the sort of hostile thing. These aren't being sort of gobbled up against their will. They're obviously open to it. They have accepted the deal. They want to do it because I imagine they think it's going to be good for their studio. It's going to allow them to create, hopefully, bigger and better things, and hopefully allow Housemarque to create a Returnal 2 or whatever they want to do next, where maybe if they were still independent, I'm not too sure what the sales of Returnal were like, but I don't think they were. I think they were good at the beginning, and then I think it tailed off quite quickly from from sort of what I've read, maybe Returnal 2 then doesn't become a reality, but now they're owned by PlayStation. They can make Returnal 2 if that's what they want to make next. Luke, I'll come to you next, actually, because I haven't heard from you this topic too much. And it was actually yourself who educated me very kindly on Nix's and sort of the role that they'll fit, I guess, where they'll fit in with PlayStation Studios, because they're not a development, as in they're not going to release necessarily a new IP, a new game. Or maybe that might change. And they weren't actually a name I'd heard of previously. Obviously, Housemarque I was familiar with. I think a lot of people maybe putting two and two together and thinking, right, Nix's means more first-party games on PC, maybe even date and date. Where do you see Nix's fitting into this PlayStation Studios?
Yeah, so I think kind of half and half where I see them fitting in, because I think the natural inclination is for people to look at them and go, well, they're a PC porting studio, and that means that more PlayStation games will come to PC, and certainly more PlayStation games are going to come to PC. That's undeniable, right? Doesn't mean day and date or anything like that, but they've clearly shown an appetite for it. The games that they have released have been successful there. So bringing Nixus on board makes a lot of sense. They are probably, in my mind, one of the best PC port studios that there's been. They had a really good working relationship with Square Enix. So they did all the ports of the Tomb Raider reboot trilogy to PC, which were excellent. They've done some other stuff as well. They did the PC Marvel Avengers port, which actually wasn't that good. It was okay, but there were broader issues, I think, with that game.
Yeah.
But actually, what Nixus do is, beyond the PC element, and probably what takes up more of their work, is they're actually a technical development support studio. So they assist in the development of games, but from a purely technical side. So they did that on Avengers and multiple Tomb Raider games. So they're part of that development process. And they're quite big as a result. I think they've got probably 90, 100 developers, something like that. So they definitely aren't going to make their own games. Their founder, interestingly, was very clear about that years ago, that they were not a studio for creating IP or making games, purely off their own back. They were a technical support studio. That's their specialism, and he didn't want them to go out from that, because that's what they're the best at, which I think you can respect. So what I think they'll fall into is, yes, they will do PC ports. Clearly, they will do some of that. That will in turn take the burden of any element of that off the studio whose game is getting ported. If Uncharted 4 gets ported and Nixus are doing it, Naughty Dog don't have to worry about it at all. And I think the other thing that they will do is they will help on Sony's first party games. There will be a great technical studio to internally outsource to, if that's a term. And that will help other studio. That will free up the capability of studios like Naughty Dog and Bend and Santa Monica, etc., to keep working on their games in a different fashion and to get games out quicker, right? I think that's quite an important bit. So I think it's a really smart acquisition from PlayStation. It's a really, it makes sense with what they want to do. It's, as I think I mentioned probably on one of the Discord chats that we had, that it's not like, it's not one you look at as a game and go, oh, that's really exciting, isn't it? Because it isn't. It's not an exciting acquisition, but it's a clever one, yeah. Right? And it will help. It will have end results for PlayStation gamers, but just not in terms of seeing, Nix's first new IP of ever. It won't be like that. It will just come in terms of the cadence of games and the support of those games, and then also obviously PC ports. So I think it's a really good one. And I don't know if you want to touch on Housemarque as well.
Yeah, go for it. But
yeah, the Housemarque one I was really delighted with, actually, because I'm a huge fan of Housemarque, and they have such a great history of games. They're famous for their arcade shooters, essentially, modernized arcade shooters, like Nex Machina, Resogun. They did Matterfall as well. They've done these really, really good games, but they have always had problems in terms of sales. Part of that has always come down to the fact that in the modern day, those kind of arcade shooters generally don't sell well, even if you're the best at them, like Housemarque are. And so they actually had to pivot a few years ago, and they were making a battle royale of all things.
I remember
called,
this actually, because if I remember, I can't remember the name, but it was such a generic.
Divers.
Yeah, it was such a generic name. I felt for a BR game, and it didn't really inspire. Sort of,
nope.
You know what it felt like? It felt like Cliff Blazinski. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. What? Because he created two. What were they called?
He made Lawbreakers.
Lawbreakers, and then I'm pretty sure there was another one that I tried very quickly after that.
It was like the 80s themed battle royale game, wasn't it? Yeah, I can't remember what it's called.
It sort of felt similar when I remember reading that news. It kind of felt like Cliffy B jumping on the sort of, right, these things are hot right now. Let's get one out. Let's get some cash. And it kind of felt like a developer doing something almost that they're not known for. Again, or I was going to say against their will, not necessarily against their will, but basically because they were trying to capitalize that purely from a financial perspective. Storm Divers certainly felt like that to me.
Yeah, and it was, I think Housemarque were very upfront about that, in that, they were, weren't they? They had no choice. They were like, we need to make something that's, that's going to draw people in, because our current games aren't doing it. Not through quality, but through genre and all that kind of stuff. So they did have to pivot to that, and then Sony seemingly stepped in and then funded them to make Returnal, which to this day is my favorite game of this year. I think it's absolutely incredible. It's Housemarque's first AAA experience. It still has all of the Housemarque DNA in terms of action and kind of arcade shooting, but it's all wrapped up within a really, really fantastic story. Like, I cannot overstate that enough. It is an incredibly well-told and haunting and memorable story, and mysterious as well. And it's a brilliant game. I think commercially, actually, it exceeded expectations. So I think it was kind of it was all over the place on the charts, but apparently it sold well in excess of 1 million copies, which for a game like that is very, very good. Yeah,
especially being exclusive as well. It's not like it was on PS4 and 5, so it had a much smaller install base to tap into as well.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously critically it did very, very well. And general gamer sentiment on that has been overwhelmingly positive, apart from the poo-poo bits that they had with the kind of bugs right at the start, which luckily I was not exposed to, but that was an issue, but they fixed that. So it's great that really that they've been acquired. And as people have said, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, like, they rarely work in the case of, some big boy comes up to you and goes, we're going to buy you. And you go, oh, okay. Like, it doesn't work like that. You kind of get a feel for these things, and then you negotiate. And, the only hostile takeovers that exist in the world are from public companies, because you can literally just go, right, we're going to buy all of your shares, or buy as many shares as we can to own a majority. That's a hostile takeover. You can't do that with private companies. So you actually have to go and speak to the people that own the private companies and go, well, we've got an offer. What do you think? And they can go, not interested, thanks. Now, of course, like, there's kind of economic pressures that come with being independent developers, right? And that have been touched on, and I won't go over those. So it's important for, those founders, etc., to look at it and go, well, what's the future of this studio, right? Can we afford to live, and keep developing games outside of being acquired? And for some, they can't, right? And so they have to go into those negotiations. But increasingly these days, for those developers, it's rarer and rarer, but it still happens. And a developer like Housemarque, I think, given Returnal was successful, they would have, kept entering deals with Sony and been more and more successful. But they were one of those kind of developers where you kind of fear for them because they hadn't before Returnal had big commercial successes. And the one I always go back to that I'm also glad was really acquired was Arcane, as part of the Bethesda deal, because Arcane really, again, had the same problems where they made these, incredibly clever, critically successful immersive sims, but that don't perform particularly well commercially. And, Bethesda, existing outside of Microsoft, I am sure had to have a look at them and go like, well, either you have to pivot your ideas to be something more commercially successful, or there may not be an Arcane anymore, right? So, Microsoft acquiring them, for example, means that we'll continue to get Arcane games and the games that they're very good at making, and that's a great thing. That's a really great thing, and the same is true of Housemarque. So I'm delighted that they were acquired. Bluepoint is another one. Like, that has to be real. Like, nobody at Sony Japan is just, kind of Fantasy League mocking up, a PlayStation Studios acquires X company, right? They had that made for a purpose. It clearly is going to happen. Interestingly, Bluepoint turned around and put on their Twitter that they're a fully independent studio.
Yeah, I did see that.
I saw that. It makes you wonder, do you reckon they were just putting people off the scent? Because that was obviously, an official Sony kind of... And I don't think you'd go to that length of creating that until, talks were very well developed. Do you know what I mean? That's not someone at Sony that's just photoshopped that together. That's a marketing team that's put that together.
Yeah, exactly. And Bluepoint are known for trolling people quite a lot. They did this when there were tons of rumours going about what they were making before they announced Demon's Souls, where they put together this like elaborate Twitter post that was kind of like a paragraph, and it was sort of wordplay on all sorts of like all of the rumors. So it could have been one of like 7 games. Yeah, Metal Gear, Demon's Souls. Like it was just all of these things. So I think they have a reputation of doing that. And also, like, it's probably just not quite ready to be announced yet. I'm sure it's not far away. And I mean, you can tell that it's 95% real by the fact that if it wasn't, and the mistake like that was made, Sony and all Bluepoint would come out explicitly say that no, we're not being acquired. Like they would put that to bed very quickly. The fact that they haven't, and all Bluepoint have done is updated their Twitter bio says volumes. So, I don't think any of these are reactionary to Microsoft. They're all, apart from Nixxes, which is a bit out there because they haven't had the same working relationship as Housemarque and Bluepoint. They're all clearly purchases that are meant to be kind of cumulative and add to the capabilities of their studios. They're targeted.
The Nixxes still seems more strategic, doesn't it? There's a plan for those, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the Nixxes one is, look, we have an idea of what we want to do in terms of PC and kind of broader studio support. So we're going to find someone who can do that and that we trust. And I think they're based in, they're Dutch. And I think Herman Hulse said on Twitter that they'd worked with them to get kills on Shadow Fallout, apparently. So again, they still knew them quite well. So yeah, I think I'm really happy for Housemarque in particular. And, I think they're just good moves from Sony.
Wonderful. Well, I guess we'll stick on PlayStation for now because they were also in the news for maybe not so good things, I guess, maybe to say the least. And I know we've got Indie Gamer in the chat as well. So Indie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this if you've got any. I'm sure you have. But I guess Flat, we'll come to you first on this one. Actually, I'm not too sure how much you saw of it because I know you've been a busy guy. But essentially, some indie developers came out basically criticizing PlayStation and how they work with and treat their independent developers. We've actually just spoken about Housemarque, and obviously PlayStation got a very, very close relationship with them, and Housemarque were previously independent. And yet here are some of these other independent developers who, I guess one in particular who came out and basically said they get very little support, even saying as much as they don't see much point in releasing on PlayStation, which is such a fascinating thing to say when you consider that PlayStation have 120 to 30 million consoles across PS4 and PS5 out, where they're thinking it's pointless releasing the game on that platform and exposing the game to that user base, because they simply don't get the support from PlayStation. And then off the back of that, a couple of other independent developers came out and basically backed them up and said, look, it's difficult to get support in terms of if they want to do a sale, speaking with an account manager, unless maybe you're big enough to work with them. And there was actually a few really interesting graphs that came out that showed the sales split. I think one of them basically said that their game gets more sales on itch.io than it did on PlayStation, which again is fascinating. And it kind of it represents, I guess, a role reversal, I think, a little bit from the previous generation, where Xbox were criticized quite a lot for not supporting independent developers, and Sony were the ones during the PS4 generation who were really embracing indie development and became sort of the de facto sort of platform, I think, for a lot of these games. Do you think maybe this is a shift in focus from PlayStation, where they're maybe just simply more interested in these AAA blockbusters, and maybe indie development isn't something they're interested in? Do we need to see more from Sony to support these studios? Where do you stand on this topic, Flap? And again, apologies if you missed some of that, so you've got any questions.
Yeah, I was kept up with this one, because I know Yongye did quite a good video on that, quite an in-depth one as well. I think it was Ian Garner that kind of first raised the alarm bell. He worked for Neon Doctrine, I think, indie dev. Yeah, it was strange, wasn't it? Because, like you say, PlayStation kind of is synonymous with kind of the indie games, and you just kind of assumed that, indie devs on the PlayStation platform were kind of well looked after. You would have assumed PlayStation are easy to do business with from a from an indie dev's perspective. So to see this kind of land, it was kind of quite surprising, to be honest. And I guess at first you could kind of write that off as a disgruntled indie dev, and some shit's obviously gone down. We don't know what, but he's a bit disgruntled and stuff. But the fact others kind of came out and was saying the same sort of thing was a bit of an eye opener, and quite surprising and disappointing in lots of ways. Because, like you say, PlayStation were the ones that were seen as kind of indie dev friendly, and so to hear this, a little bit disappointing. But I've got to be honest, since the Apple versus Epic thing, and lots of dirty laundry has been aired, it doesn't kind of surprise me in some regards, because obviously Sony are quite commercially aggressive, it seems. And, I think he was saying that even to get your game kind of visible on the store costs $25,000, that kind of thing. It was really surprising, to be honest, and a little bit disappointing, and does fly in the face of what we think of Sony and perhaps indie developers to a certain degree. They seem to be quite commercially aggressive at the moment. I don't think it's called for. They've got a huge market. I appreciate that. They're probably in a position where they can bully the sort of indie devs to a certain degree, but I'm not really sure why they would. I know Game Pass and Xbox was sort of explicitly mentioned as well, and praise kind of went that way. I don't know. It's a strange situation that kind of Sony have found themselves in. I think they will respond. I think in the long run, it doesn't make much sense for them to pee off all of the devs, if I'm honest, the indie devs. And like I say, perhaps it's not all of them. Perhaps it's just certain disgruntled ones that, I don't know, that they feel like they haven't been treated fairly. But it's interesting to see how this one pans out, and if and how Sony will respond, to be honest, because I'm not really sure if we'll ever find out how this has been resolved, because obviously it takes one sort of brave indie dev to sort of break the ice, and then all of the others kind of chip in as well. But how this gets resolved, I don't really know, in all honesty.
Yeah, it might be one of those things where we don't actually hear anything. I mean, you'd hope that maybe at some point one of the developers would maybe come out and be able to sort of explain that they've worked with Sony. Maybe Sony themselves come out and say, look, we've heard from these developers, and we're going to maybe work with them a little bit differently. I think it would have been easy to brush it off as maybe just one disgruntled developer had it just been Ian Garner who came up. But like I say, the support in the indie development scene from other developers was, I guess, first of all, in some ways nice to see. People, these small developers actually being brave enough to speak out against Sony, because you can imagine that was probably took some balls to say the least, to speak out against the essentially the biggest platform holder that's out there, and to say something negative in such a public space, it took some balls, but it certainly got a lot of support from other game developers, and I guess we can only hope that they respond to that and change. Whether we hear about it or not, it's kind of irrelevant. Hopefully, in the background, that things do change and things are a little bit better for independent developers. I am a little conscious of time because we do have one more topic that we want to touch on, but I guess Pucks, we'll come to you next very quickly if you don't mind. Do you have any thoughts on this independent developer side of things? And obviously you're part of the Indie Gamer podcast, so you're obviously very close to the indie scene. How did it make you feel when you saw these comments from Ian and some of the other developers?
Yeah, I actually saw these tweets quite early on before it kind of made the news in a way. And when I read it, the comments were quite light. But when I caught up with it later on, as everyone else has said already, there was loads of outpour in backing up the claims. And the thing that came to my mind is, this whole massive marketing campaign behind PlayStation where they keep saying that they want PlayStation to be the home of not only large multiplayer experiences, but they also want to be where the one platform you go to if you want the big AAA blockbuster single player experiences. And that's not really the messaging that says, oh, and we also support indie devs, by the way. So in my mind, at least from what I'm seeing and witnessing as time is moving forward with PlayStation, I kind of feel that maybe they're trying to, I don't know, maybe just detract from being an indie machine. It kind of sounds as if they want to sell themselves so much to wanting to be this one platform for the big experiences that actually they're not too fussed about having indies there, because I think they know that a lot of their player base primarily only care about those big experiences. And I think even from just a consumer perception perspective, I myself don't look at PlayStation and think that's a good indie machine, if I'm perfectly honest. Yeah. I would look to PC and Xbox, because they have a fantastic Idea Xbox program, right? And they openly support
and Game
that.
Pass.
Yeah,
and Game Pass helps that.
And Switch as well.
Yeah.
Switch is obviously, in a lot of cases, sort of the primary development platform.
Yes, that as well. And but PlayStation, I know they have an indie. What's the term? Like an indie program, I guess, for where small time devs and people doing things on their own can sign up and buy a dev kit, whatever else. But a lot of their, again, not the global perception, as well as if you look at those parts on the website, it's obviously it looks all well and good, but then looking at these comments, for me, it kind of backs up the general consensus that, PlayStation is itself focusing on being a AAA machine and actually doesn't care too much about those other platforms, which is a shame. But then, as I can't remember who said it, but mentioning that one particular dev released a game and actually it sold better on itch.io than it did on PlayStation. Yeah. That's
that
remarkable.
Was fascinating.
I don't even know if that's a good or bad thing, really. But because itch.io is a great platform for indie devs to at least start off from nothing, I guess, right? If you're making just small projects, but just to hear that you go through all the effort as an indie dev to you have to sign up and pay for the program, pay for a dev kit, optimize for the console, and then release it, and then people just say, oh, actually, most of my sales come from this PC original that I made. It's a bit of a kick in the teeth in the way, unfortunately. And just to hear the lack of proper support outside of maybe a day or two on the featured page, if you're lucky, is a bit of a kick in the teeth in a way. So I can definitely see why indie devs would be against going toward them. But again, as I say, I don't look at PlayStation as an indie machine in the first place. And I'd like to believe that most other players don't either. So the one takeaway as an indie dev, unfortunately for me, would be, unless you really see a benefit, don't bother. What's the point?
Yeah, but it's difficult, isn't it? Because I imagine, obviously, you look at the player base, and obviously you want to release on the platform that has technically the biggest user base in some respects. I think the only thing that we can maybe hope from this is, as I mentioned before, Xbox took a lot of criticism during the Xbox One generation and how they sort of didn't focus on the indie scene, and I think at that point, obviously, a lot of developers actually ended up going towards PlayStation because of that, and they had to react to that. And I think now they have switched course, where they now are more popular with indie developers. Anybody can now develop a game. Anyone can turn their Xbox into a dev kit, essentially. They've obviously got the ID Xbox program that is a big part of their shows. I actually thought the way Microsoft handled indie developers during their E3 conference was fantastic. They essentially just treated it like any other game, which was great to see. So I can only hope that with this, I guess, public outburst isn't probably the right term, but with this news coming out, that maybe Sony will take stock and they will maybe reflect on it and then hopefully change things for the better in the not too distant future. So I guess let's say I am a little conscious of time because we did have one, I guess, smaller topic to touch on before the end of the show. So but before we do that, I guess, do we have any comments on sort of the PlayStation news that we discussed?
We do have some. Sorry about that. I was on mute.
That's all right.
If you're on about chat comments,
chat comments.
I've got a couple here. So one's from the Indie Gamer who says it's been something that's been building up for a while. To be honest, Sony have been heavily focusing on big AAAs and their fan base largely show up for those blockbusters, and they're doubling down on it, which I think is true. I don't think you can deny that really. And Masuko put that you're so right indeed. Now the PS mass is so focused on AAA that they ridicule the small games. The chat on their streams are horrible. I think that's a kind of the kind of ridicule of indie games is probably something that's more endemic to the gaming community as a whole. That's certainly never gone away. There are still lots and lots and lots of people who buy multiple platforms or game on multiple platforms that ridicule indie games for how they look and just dismiss them outright. But certainly I think that, Sony have cultivated an image of their platform being the place for blockbusters. And so that, as Indy says, that when, gamers don't get that and they see an indie game, it's maybe a bit more negative. I don't know what other people... What you might think of that, Scott, that kind of image of Sony, whether you think that's right.
Yeah, it's difficult to say really, because I understand what was it Mexico that made the comment, and because if you look at kind of comments from, I guess, the internet, it's probably not maybe a good place to get sort of how people genuinely and actually feel. And I think that's the case with anything that's negative. You often find just in life the most negative comments and people are the ones that are maybe the most vocal. People don't go necessarily shouting from the rooftop to say something's good, but the people who think it's bad are gonna make sure you know about it. It's kind of similar mentality to just sort of like reviews, in general and stuff. But yeah, so it is an interesting one, mate. That's I guess difficult to really gauge exactly how people view them or how it looks.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And then another one here from it's Timmy who says they, being Sony, were only big on supporting indies on PS4 when they had no decent exclusives at the start of the PS4 era. And now that they're making more big AAA games, they don't care now. That's an interesting one because I think when we're talking about indies on PlayStation, I think there's different, clearly the back end of how indies are supported when you're talking about the really small indies is not good, right? We've had many reports on that stemming from the first one that's been talked about, and even Push Square have done an article on this, right, where they've asked indie developers. When you go up to the kind of, and I hate to use this term, but the blockbuster indies or the bigger scale indies. Yeah. I think Sony have been very supportive of those because you only have to look at stuff like, State of Plays and the showcases and, games like Sifu and Kenna and, Stray and Little Devil Inside. There are all these indie games that have prominent positions in those shows. And that are all kind of, in some respect, exclusive to PS5/PS4 and plus coming on PC. But certainly, I think that I'd probably agree to some extent that that there was a bigger emphasis back in the PS4 days because when it came up to launch, they really didn't have much, right? And their studios were in this kind of bad end period cycle where they just didn't have the content from their first party to kind of start padding out launch. I think this time, obviously, it's been a lot more balanced. They've had a lot more first party stuff come out in the first year. or coming up to the first year. But it's a valid criticism, I think. But I think certainly for the really small indies, right, the kind of developers that are, you know, the 2-man bands and that sort of stuff, like it's clearly not a good system that they have. And I think one of the things that Push Square commented on as well that was quite interesting was that actually dealing with Sony in it, in terms of when you get to talk to someone as an indie, is really positive and really good. But like, the amount of time that they take to reply is terrible, because they apparently don't have hardly any staff that do this at Sony, right? So you have all these kind of issues that even when you do speak to someone, they might be great, but there's not the responses are so slow because they're slammed, and they don't have enough people.
Talking months to respond.
Like
we're not talking
days
days or weeks. We're talking months, I think. Yeah.
So I think it's quite interesting. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on it, but it's it's clearly something they need to improve.
Yeah. Well, I guess what we'll do then, I guess we'll move on to sort of our third and final topic. We did have some in reserve, but I don't think we're going to have time to do that. I do think this will be sort of our shorter topic of the evening, and that's in relation to Xcloud. And Pong, we haven't heard from you for a while, mate. Apologies. So I'll ask you to chip in first here.
I think I make up for it every time I talk, Scott. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So recently, I think we've known about it for a while. Microsoft have been upgrading their cloud or their Azure servers to custom Series X hardware, which they announced, I think it was just last week in a blog post, that essentially now their cloud gaming hardware is based on the Series X. And what that essentially does now is allows people to play games or the Series X or S equivalent of those games from the cloud, so we can take advantage of things like faster load times, higher frame rates, and things like that. And this is, I think, one of the big steps that Microsoft really needed to take in order to push cloud gaming onto sort of the next level. As someone who's played with it a fair bit, and I obviously primarily play on the Series X, and before the server hardware upgrades went, I would go back to playing on the cloud, and just little things like the load times were just awful. Latency was still a problem, that sort of thing. So I think this was a really big move that Microsoft needed to make, and I was a little surprised that it happened as quickly as it did, especially in light of some of the shortages. So Pong, from your perspective, I'm curious, have you tried cloud gaming yourself? Did you have an opportunity to play it before the hardware upgrades? Have you played it since? What's your thoughts and feelings on cloud gaming at this point?
Yeah, I definitely had a chance. I was actually early invite to the beta too. So I've played around with the cloud gaming for a while. I can't say that I've played extensively on it, but I definitely have tried multiple different games, both prior to the server blade upgrades and then afterwards now. Played on my phone, also played on my Surface Pro 4. So I've tried different ways, and I'm lucky enough to have good internet at my house, and I have a good Wi-Fi system. But in my bedroom, where I've played a lot of it before bed, I don't have absolutely the best connection, because I do have we have a pretty big house, so the Wi-Fi isn't the strongest in there. And prior to the server blades being upgraded, I definitely could not play like a first person shooter or a action, or I should say like a racing game like Horizon. Both of those, anything that required Twitch, fast Twitch, or the lowest lag possible, did not work prior to the server blades. And I guess I'll highlight one game, which was Doom. Prior to the server blades being upgraded, was near impossible to play. It was not good. Now I just played it the other night after the server blade upgrades, and I actually made it through an entire level. And it definitely would not be my first choice by any stretch of the imagination. And myself personally, I would never, probably play extensively a first-person shooter or something like that on my phone, just because I just don't like it. I just don't enjoy it. I've got the Razer Kishi, which is a great setup for mobile, but playing those types of games, for me, I gotta have my big screen. I gotta have my console. Yeah. That's just me. But I actually did complete a whole level in Doom. I died a few times where I probably should not have died, due to maybe some minor lag, or just not quite there yet, but overall the experience was great. Now playing other games, turn-based games, that kind of stuff on there is perfect. I played a lot of Octopath Traveler through the cloud, and it works fantastic. I played Octopath Traveler using 4G mobile, at work, and it's been great. I have zero complaints. Those games are like perfect for where the technology is at right now. I think those games do just work. I mean, they're fantastic. It'd be interesting to hear from people, over in the East, like Japan, that has a already, high-end built-in internet experience, and that's why so many people play mobile over there. I'd love to see how Xcloud is doing over there, and to see what the differences are. But I think the server blade upgrade was necessary. You kind of touched on it a little bit, Scott. That was kind of shocking how fast they did do the upgrades. Now, what was interesting to me was the interview with Phil with IGN, where he touched on this, and he said that there is a balance, and they had to decide what was important. Sacrificing, some consoles that could have been out in the wild versus getting the server upgrades. Now, my understanding originally was that they were actually able to upgrade the server blades with Series X boards that did not meet the standards for the console. So they were kind of using that. That was my original understanding, was they were using some of the boards that, came out with the chips that just weren't up to par to put into a console, but they could use them for the server blades because they didn't have to meet the same spec requirements that the consoles actually did. So it was kind of interesting for me to hear that they actually did have to make that sacrifice, because that kind of changes my thinking on that. But it makes sense, right? I think from the standpoint of, yes, of course, I'm sure that was a tough decision to make. Obviously with people clamoring for the next gen consoles and it being so hard to get, I'm sure it was probably really hard on Phil and his team to make that decision. But I think that with where everything's at, with everything that happened last year, now with the shortage, I think they probably said the benefits of getting the cloud up to speed, so that people have an opportunity to at least experience, some of the games, through, whether it's through, the cloud, on their phone or tablet or, PC, or, now eventually they're talking about the Xbox Ones are going to get upgraded so they can go ahead and you can use it through that browser too. I think they probably said that the benefits of that outweighed not having, or having less consoles available in the wild at this point, because more people will have access to the cloud and they really do want to push it. And I think that kind of sped up where they wanted, because I had originally heard that they were talking about by the end of this year. So, we're 5 months, ahead of schedule. So that probably shows their commitment to do this and to get this up to speed right now. So I think it's a great thing. I enjoy it. Obviously, we got a long ways to go. We're just, again, in the infancy of cloud gaming, and there's a lot to do between here and 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as far as tech catching up with the rest of everything else. Is the world still needs. We still got lots of areas that just it's not going to work. We still got a lot of people without any reasonable type of internet connection, so it's just not going to be feasible for them. But I think we are getting there. And again, this just goes back to everything Microsoft has been doing, everything Xbox has done since they decided to go this route with Game Pass and xCloud, and looking towards the future of where things are going to be at, whether we like it or not. The future is all digital. The future is going to be streaming, and we will get there eventually. And Microsoft just wants to make sure they're in the position to be the leaders in that, and that's why they're doing this. But it is a great thing. I suggest that everybody try it. I know there's some people out there that have had bad experiences still, even after the server blade upgrades, even with decent internet. Some locations just it's not up to par yet. But I think everybody should try it out, because again, for certain games, it works extremely well, and it is very convenient to be able to play at work on break, or in bed before I go to sleep. It's very convenient to have that accessibility, and I think I can't really wait till the future to see what the potential is, where we can play anywhere, anytime. I think that's a great thing. So
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'll open up to sort of the rest of the panel rather than anyone in particular, because I'm not too sure where everybody's experience with cloud gaming is. So please, anybody sort of jump in, because I'm really curious to hear what people's experiences are, particularly if if you've had a chance to try it both before and after, and whether it has sort of a noticeable difference on your experience. Has anybody else on the panel had the opportunity to play it too much?
I've played quite a lot of cloud gaming. Funny enough, the game that I've played the most is Sea of Thieves. Strangely enough.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, normally because I'm around someone else's house, and obviously because it's not split screen, we can still jump into Sea of Thieves and play in the same world. Me on my phone, them on their Xbox and stuff, and it wasn't the best experience in the world. Let's be honest, and Sea of Thieves isn't necessarily a Twitch shooter. It is obviously a first-person shooter to a certain degree. And obviously, if you are playing people that are playing on local hardware, that they are tough to beat.
Yeah.
I've not tried it since, if I'm honest, and I am really intrigued to see the difference, although I kind of suspect it's not going to be massively different, if I'm honest. Although it will be interesting to see. I mean, it should obviously load a hell of a lot faster.
Yeah, the load times are very It is as noticeable as going from an Xbox One to a Series X or S flip from like a load times perspective, certainly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've probably played a good 10, 15 hours on the cloud in Sea of Thieves, if not more, to be honest. So, yeah, I haven't played it for a little while, but I think I would certainly notice a difference. So I'm going to have to give it a go, to be honest. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But what I really like about this move is it brings parity to the whole next generation side of things.
Yeah.
So obviously anything. So let's, for example, something like the Medium. You could now stream the Medium on your phone. Obviously, an Xbox Series only
that's a
game.
really good point.
Historically, but now everyone can play it, and I think this was the prelude to obviously getting it on the Xbox One generation of consoles, SX, and obviously the OG Xbox One. And so, yeah, you can obviously play next gen games now on those systems. You're not going to enjoy 120 frames per second or anything like that, but you are going to be able to play games that wouldn't necessarily be available. So, and I too was surprised how fast this was rolled out, and I agree with Pong. I'd heard that they were using natural wastage from the chip making process to stick in their blade servers, and what a fantastic use that is, because at a time where possibly other manufacturers are literally having to bin the valuable silicon that doesn't quite cut the grade, Microsoft are able to put it to use, which is just fantastic, to be honest. And obviously, they're able to run it concurrently with trying to get consoles out the door as well. So, kudos to them. Kudos to Jason Ronald and the whole Xbox team. And it's fantastic. Lots of people in the comments are saying, streaming isn't the future and it's not for them. And that's absolutely fine. But there are also people in the chat that are saying, they haven't either managed to get a next-gen console yet or not in a position to be able to afford ones, but they will still be able to play the next-gen games. So I think that's a fantastic move.
Yeah, and Phil Spencer spoke about on the same IGN interview that Pong referred to. I think he spoke about how when they were looking at Flight Simulator's sort of release date, they wanted to make sure that when they had a date in mind, that they were able to at least communicate that you would be able to stream this game on Xbox One hardware. Obviously, they've not put a date on that, but at least they can say to existing Xbox One users, in the not too distant future, you're going to be able to play these games, whether you upgrade sort of your hardware or not. Luke and Pucks, have you guys had much chance to try the cloud gaming since the server upgrades?
Not since the server upgrades, unfortunately, but I think one of the games I am interested to jump into soon to test again is Forza Horizon 4, because when on the old system now of the before the upgrade, I did play a few titles. I think one of the first ones I did play was Golf with Your Friends as part of Mr. Tushi's game night a couple of months ago, and I remember, because I didn't have an Xbox at the time, and I remember playing with the guys with my phone on a stand, playing with a PS4 controller. It was quite a bizarre experience, but it all kind of amalgamated together very well. But then for a small game like that, it ran absolutely perfectly fine. And for me, it was more than playable for, just a couple of hours to joke around with people online, right? But when I played an arguably more demanding game than such as Forza Horizon, even though it's just streaming, there was definitely a lot more latency and delay in terms of the inputs and stuff. So I don't know whether or not there's a lot of graphical intensity happening in the background, and maybe the processing is, I don't know, something's been slowed down somewhere, because in my mind it shouldn't be too much different to obviously streaming a YouTube video, but then again you've obviously got a lot more parameters in place, such as your inputs going back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So heavier games like that it was definitely, the input lag was noticeable enough that it wasn't you wouldn't play it for more than 10 minutes, put it that way, but you could adjust to it. I mean, if you take the timing into account, but if you're doing an actual race, then it was nowhere near good enough. So I haven't yet, unfortunately, is my answer. Just a bit long-winded, but that is the one game I think I'd like to try first once I get the opportunity to try it again.
Yeah, on the Forza point, I'm not going to pretend I know the technicalities of it by any stretch, but I have read some comments from Jez Corden, who certainly knows a little bit more about myself, who's spoken about how the Xbox One hardware obviously wasn't designed with that game streaming in mind, and that's why it struggled particularly with 3D games. And the Series X hardware being specifically designed for this actually does help with latency, particularly with 3D games, apparently. So I guess that sort of feeds into that pucks, because I certainly had the same experience. You know, I play a lot of games like Slay the Spire. I recently tried out Monster Train, Octopath, Yakuza, turn-based games that obviously are a little less latency dependent. But then previously, when trying sort of something that needed a little bit more responsiveness, didn't quite work, and I've certainly noticed improvement on Series X with those types of games as well. So it's interesting that obviously just changing the hardware improves input latency by itself, allegedly, at least anyway, and certainly that seems to be the case in my experience. So Luke, have you had a chance to play it out of interest, mate?
No, I haven't. I have played with it before, a little bit. I don't have any real use case in my house for it, sadly.
Yeah.
Because like even the kind of use case that I think most people have at the moment, who also have dedicated hardware, which is like in their bedroom, for example. My Series X is in my bedroom, so like it would be a bit weird if I was just in bed but playing on my phone when the Series X is right there. So it's like I've never really had the use case for it, and then I don't think at the minute there's kind of, you know, mobile data platforms are good enough really to take this out and about. I think some might be, and in the area might be quite good, but most aren't. So yeah, so I've not played with it. For me, I appreciate what cloud gaming is and what it's trying to do, but I don't want any part of that future at all.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think that's a sentiment for a lot of people.
Yeah. I really do appreciate what it's trying to do, but I just don't want us to go to that route, or it be the only route in the future, which I don't think it will be, or at least for a very, very long time. But yeah. So, but I am interested to. Sadly, I was really stupid because I think, as I mentioned in the Discord before, or somewhere, I meant to when I went on holiday the other week, I was kind of picking between the Switch and an iPad, a 12-inch iPad Pro, and I ended up going with the iPad Pro because I was like, oh, maybe I can use like the browser through the, you know, for iOS or something like that. All of which would have been totally, you know, great idea had I not forgot also to bring a controller. So I don't really want to play touchscreen games with a massive iPad. So that was my only use case where I could have kind of feasibly contributed to this discussion in terms of cloud gaming, but I didn't. So no, but I think it's great that they are doing that, and I really, really, really like the idea that, you know, they're bringing these games now, or they're bringing that capability of cloud streaming to the Xbox One generation, so that you can still, in some respect, you know, have a next gen experience, even though you're on those platforms. I think that's like a super cool idea, and it's super consumer friendly as well. So that's great. I think it will probably be an atrocious way to play some of the games, but it's still really cool. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we'll sort of begin wrapping up the show there, I guess. But before we do sort of any outros or anything like that, do we have sort of any comments from the chat in relation to cloud gaming, Luke?
Yeah, I've got I got two here. I mean, there's been others, but I think I quite like these. So UK Dazra said he's noticed smaller games work a lot better on the cloud, which I think is something that we've kind of generally touched on. In that, the kind of twitchy games don't really work quite as well. But if you're playing, Scott, like you're playing, like Slay the Spire or anything like that, or even games like Yakuza Like a Dragon, right? They work so much better.
Yeah.
Or they can work just as well in practice on the cloud as they do natively. So I think that's cool. And then to top it off, I think to end the conversation as a whole, Stubbs said it's regarding cloud, it's not a future I want. F the cloud. So yeah. I think let's send it.
don't mince your words there, Stubbs. Whatever you do, mate. So. No, I think that's fair. And I think a lot of people are obviously of a similar opinion. I think the main thing, though, is, and again, alluding to the interview with Phil Spencer on IGN, if you haven't watched it, please do. He talks about how, look, it's not the ideal way. He knows that, but it's an option and it allows more people to get involved, which is obviously a good thing. So, well, I think there, Christ, that 2 hours has been hard. I'm not going to lie, Flap, I do have a newfound respect for what you do, mate, if I'm being completely honest.
You're kidding, mate. You smashed it out of the park.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that either. You've done a phenomenal job today.
Yeah.
You did do a phenomenal job.
Thank you very much, guys. Very, very kind.
Flap didn't have to jump in and grab the wheel once. It was perfect.
No, I didn't. I tell you what, though, I'm sweating buckets over here. So I'll be, but I do appreciate the kind comments and chat. I've been very kind as well. So, but I think we'll wrap up the show there. Thank you very much, everyone who's joined, everyone in chat. You've been fantastic. Really, really appreciate the kind comments and obviously all the comments about the topics as well. So I guess to sort of round up the show, I think we'll start with our special guests today. So, Mr. Soul, thank you very much for joining us again. I hope you've enjoyed it, mate. And I guess just for everyone who, I mean, let's be honest, I'm pretty sure everyone in the chat knows who you are. But just in case there's the odd one or two there who don't know where to find you, Pong, where can they find you on the internet, mate?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Scott. No, you absolutely did a phenomenal job. So no worries here whatsoever, man. You did great. You may be sweating, but you can go ahead and take a deep sigh because you got through it and you did it awesome. So, man, this is perfect. What a great way to spend part of my Independence Day, 4th of July with you. Fine gentlemen. Again, love and respect to all of you guys. Chat, same goes for all of you. I know most of you from chats obviously been around, but it's great to see everybody come out. This is one of the best communities going around. I've said that since I first jumped in. And you guys just amaze me all the time. The discussions have been absolutely incredible in there. So it just makes our job that much easier when we're on here. And of course, I always enjoy jumping in and talking with you guys when I'm just sitting in the chat as well. So love you all. Thank you all so much for a fantastic Sunday. You can find me Pong Soul everywhere, Xbox, Twitter. You know the drill. Follow me. I'll follow you back. Love talking about video games, obviously. And then you can find me a bunch of different places. So Tuesdays, Xbox Factor podcast over at Double Barrel Gaming with Mr. Boomstick, Zemi Games, and now the VGHD 3-bit as well has joined us on Tuesdays. So that's 12 p.m. Eastern, 11 o'clock Central Time. Friday nights is 2-Tab Friday, as I like to call it, because my brother from another Steel Rain, who was on last week, here is on GRG with K Mega, who is also on here. Shout out to those guys over there. And I am on the Xbox Ultimate with Fun Speculation, aka Mav, his amazing wife Caitlin, and the rest of the Magnificent Seven. And that starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time, which I know is quite early for everybody or most people over on this side of the pond, but it is what it is. Xbox Ultimate, we have an awesome time there. Saturday mornings, again, Steel Rain and myself have living split screen. We just wrapped up episode 15. I cannot believe we've already done 15 shows, but man, it's just him and I. We have a great time. We go for 2.5, 3 hours. It's just him and I talking, but we try to get the chat involved. We take topics from the chat. It's a great time. Split screen is all one word. It's living split screen. That is at 10 o'clock Eastern in the morning, 9 o'clock Central Time, 3 p.m. UK time. So come check us out on Saturdays. It's a great time. We just, oh God, we love the community. It's been so supportive. It's been absolutely incredible. And then Saturday nights, the Shop Podcast with PTK Blam, Centurion, Fuzzy Belvedere, and Stagorilla. Stag's taking a little bit of a break, but PTK has been killing it with the guests that we've been having, and that starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time. And then, you know what? You never know where else I'm going to show up. So, follow me on Twitter. I always post it whenever I go somewhere else. But anyways, again, great Sunday afternoon. Appreciate all of you. Love you all. And we'll be talking real soon. Thank you again.
Yeah, holy moly, you're a busy guy, mate. Thank you, really. So, yeah, I guess, and then just to sort of wrap it up with the GPG crew, Luke, thank you very much for being the co-pilot tonight, mate. Appreciate you weren't feeling too great, but appreciate your help with that, mate. Did you have fun?
Oh yeah, always. Even when I'm dying, I think it's a good way to go out. No, it's always enjoyable, ill or not. Really good topics tonight. I thought you were superb as a host, Scott. Really, really good. So well done, and always fantastic having. It's always fantastic having Pong here. We've been on multiple podcasts before, and it's just an awesome dude, and always enjoy hearing his opinions on stuff. So and obviously Pucks and Flat, part of the very exquisite furniture that is the GPG crew, fantastic
very
as
well
usual.
said.
So it's a great show, and chat as always awesome. So
wonderful. And Pucks, come to you next, mate. Thank you very much for being here. I imagine it was maybe a little bit weird not being in the co-host and hot seat tonight, but hopefully you still had a good time.
It was a little bit. It was interesting being bottom of the list for a long time. But no, I very much enjoyed it. And Scott, I mean, I very much mirror what's been said already, and the chat. I mean, the chat have absolutely given you all the greatest wishes in the world. Oh, not wishes. Greatest compliments, I should say, as to how well you did as a host. I don't know why you've been so nervous, but
They've been very kind.
I've been there myself, you know this, and we've definitely had words after shows to say that, did that go well? But I think the chat and ourselves are very much in the seat of you've done an absolutely phenomenal job, and if you're interested, we'd definitely love to have another show. I think with you hosting in the future. If you feel up to it again.
Like I said, really, really appreciate the kind comments, and I'm sure we'll do something. I don't know. Obviously, you've done an amazing job in the past, and I guess we'll come on to Flap. I hope you don't mind me coming to you last. Obviously, the regular host. I'm sure normal service will be resumed last week. Hopefully, I did you proud, mate. I hope I did, but hopefully, you had fun being a panelist rather than the host tonight.
Oh, absolutely, my friend. It's a really weird experience. I mean, there's a few
Tell me
people
about it.
that know. Well, my life is up and down at the moment. There's lots of personal stuff going on in the background, and it's not easy to keep up with gaming news. Work's crazy. There's other stuff going on, and I'll put the word out to you guys, and you've all stepped up to the mark, and I'm so grateful to that. But you've really surprised me with how fantastic you've done tonight, and that's not just lip service. That really is like, wow, you've kind of blown me away with how kind of cool it is. And like you say, it's not easy, is it? Because you've got to try and balance everything. You've got to get things in on time, make sure everyone gets a sort of an equal say on stuff, and it's not easy. Of course, on top of that, you've got the spinning plate that is the chat as well, and you've absolutely smashed it out of the park. And to be honest, when Pucks and I first started Green Pass Gaming, it was kind of a bit of an experiment, really, but it's grown into this thing, this community, and this, the channel is bigger than any one person. The sum of our parts is, like I say, greater than any one of us, if that makes sense. And it's so nice to know that we've got you guys together as part of the GPG crew. We always have fantastic guests. I'm so blessed with the guests that we have. Chat, it's just bizarre. So absolutely grateful, mate. You, like I say, you've done a fantastic job. And like I say, Pucks is. I guess Luke's the only one that needs to kind of head one up now, and it's just great to know that we can all host, we can all do this, and we're all part of the machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have had a lot of fun despite the nerves. It has been great fun, and I do appreciate you, everyone's kind comments, and I do really appreciate chat as well. Obviously, they've been great tonight. I think we had up to 30 people in the chat tonight. Obviously, they had lots of comments, a lot of discussion going on as well. But I think on that note, we'll wrap things up. So obviously, guys, we'll probably see you same time next week for next week's podcast. We'll see who's hosting next week, unless
depends if England
actually,
win.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
That is a good point. Thank you for interrupting there, Flat.
So if England,
see you next week.
if England make it through to the finals, then we might have to postpone next week's show. But we do have a community. What do we call it? Confessions coming up.
Yes.
So we will
always good fun.
Our next show will be a confessions show as well. So we'll let you know probably via Twitter what that's all going to be about. It's going to be lots of fun. I don't think we've had a guest do the confessions show yet, have we? So we'll have to have a guest.
BMG did some of them, didn't he?
Oh,
I think a couple of weeks back, BMG joined us for it. So Still just put in the chat as well. Yeah, the show might be cancelled. So yeah, apologies. That was me just reading what I had written down earlier because I wanted to make sure I got the intro right. Completely forgetting that was the case. So hopefully, in some respects, we won't have a show next Sunday, but I'm sure we'll be doing something around it. We'll obviously know when Wednesday night. Actually, we'll know if we make the final. So we'll be making plans then. So thank you all very much for joining chat again. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next show.